The first time I heard the claim that the gospel writers never said Jesus was God, at least not Matthew, Mark, and Luke, I was in college, and it kind of took me by surprise. I mean, that's the claim of Christianity. Everything hinges on it. So is it really not there in the early gospels? What's going on there? And if it is there, then why aren't people seeing it? So everything really hinges on what did Mark say about Jesus? Who did he think he was? Most people acknowledge that the book of John comes right out and says Jesus is God. And Jesus claims to be God in that book. The problem is, John was written so much later than all the other gospels, so people worry that maybe it's not as reliable. Maybe the story had been embellished by then. It was 50 years after Jesus' life. So the focus turns to the earlier gospels. And Mark is the first gospel written about Jesus' life. So everyone wonders, what does Mark have to say? A few years ago, I had a friend who was reading the Bible for the very first time, and he said to me, you know, the gospel writers never said Jesus was God. That's something that people said about him later. And Jesus himself never said that he was God. And that kind of confused me for a moment, because I knew the church tradition I'd grown up with. I knew what the church tradition said. So I thought, well, what does the Bible really say about Jesus? I decided to investigate, starting with the earliest gospel, the book of Mark. Because if it wasn't in the book of Mark that Jesus was God, then that would cast some serious doubt on the later gospels. But if it is in the book of Mark, well, then I have to explain why so many smart people who are smarter than me, are missing it. I need to look for every possible way that Mark might have made the claim that Jesus is God. Did he use words? Did he use unique phrases from ancient times? Did he use symbolism? Maybe he depicted Jesus as God, but didn't come right out and say it. So I guess I'll just start reading. Even though I grew up with a church background, I'm going to have to try to neutralize that somehow so I can be as objective as possible. I'm going to do that because I want my research to be helpful for other people who are undecided. So I'm going to build an evidence wall, like detectives use in movies.
Pepe Sylvia, this name keeps coming up over and over again.
Got myself some note cards, and this will help me hopefully visually sort through the evidence. Oh man, I'm going to have to take down my Batman and Robin poster. Such a great movie. Sorry, George Clooney. This wall is needed for a sacred mission. The question we're trying to answer is, who is Jesus? But I need to know who Mark said Jesus was and who Jesus himself said he was. So I need to organize the evidence into two categories. Got myself some magic yarn so I can make connections. You have no idea what it's like to be a man shopping in a yarn store. This is going to help me sort the evidence, the things Mark says about Jesus, into categories, either Jesus as divine or Jesus as a human. And same thing for the things Jesus says about himself. We can put that in the divine category down here, or human. And I have more magic yarn. So if we find a connection that is supported by the evidence, we can mark it with green yarn. And if evidence does not support a theory, then we can mark it with red yarn. Well, the very first sentence of Mark here says, "The beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God." That's kind of a shocker. At first I thought this investigation was going to be over quickly, but as I searched the internet to see how people felt about this verse, it seems that they're not convinced that phrase "Son of God" means literal Son of God. They think it means follower of God, believer of God. And I realized I'd actually heard this from some of my friends. As of today, the Wikipedia page on Mark states that Mark only depicted Jesus as a regular human. So that tells me that this phrase "Son of God" is not something that people are convinced on. It means something different to them. It means a normal human. Even Bible scholar Bart Ehrman said this. He's quoted as saying, "During his lifetime, Jesus didn't call himself God and didn't consider himself to be God. None of his disciples had any inkling at all that he was God." So he doesn't count the book of John either, since it was written so much later, and he doesn't see the same claims about Jesus' deity in the earlier Gospels as he does in John. At this point, I'm feeling fairly intimidated because I'm just a normal guy. I'm somebody who likes theology and likes research, but there are people smarter than me who spend their lives investigating the Bible and making scholarly books about it. Who am I? How am I going to solve this puzzle? On second thought, I have a brain too, and I'm not afraid to use it. So now I have to figure out what this phrase meant to Mark. Human or divine? It's not like he's around for me to ask. Okay, so my first thought is to try to see if there are any other uses of this phrase in any other similar writings. That way I can use the context to try to figure out, did people think during this time period that this was a divine phrase or a human phrase? I also need to figure out who Mark was writing to, because if I can do that, then maybe I can try to think like them and figure out how would they understand this phrase? How would they define it? Every scholar I checked said Mark was writing to the Gentiles, and all that means is people who are not Jewish. So that covers anyone living in Rome from any religion, except the Jews. Now I can check to see if that phrase Son of God was used in any other ancient writings, especially in the area. Lucky for me, scholar Archie T. Wright has already done a lot of the legwork, as his book Origin of Evil Spirits dug up every major ancient document that used any variation of that phrase. So far, I have found a similar phrase, sons of God, in Job chapters 1, 2, and 38. They are angels who watched God create the earth. Then again, I found that in Genesis chapter 6, a very interesting chapter. And it is again a being that lives in the spiritual realm. Definitely not a human. Over in Greek mythology, we have works and days, which the sons of the gods are basically depicted as angels there too. And an example is Hercules, like the 80s movie. It appears there's an old ancient Jewish tradition connected to Genesis chapter 6 called the Watcher tradition from the book of Enoch. That's from the BC period, so that's before Mark is writing, and in that, the Watchers are angels called the sons of God. And in Egyptian theology, Pharaoh was also called the son of the god Ra. So you've kind of got this same idea in several different civilizations in that area. And it's always a divine figure. I'm just going to read for you what I found when I looked up Son of God in an online encyclopedia. I think you're going to find this is pretty juicy. Many figures in the ancient world used the phrase Son of God to justify their political authority. Rulers and heroes were often treated as supernatural sons of a particular god among a polytheistic pantheon, such as Zeus, Poseidon, Apollo, Hermes, Ares, and so on. Alexander the Great is an example, but also, wait for it, Emperor Caesar Augustus. Ooh, because he was Caesar when Jesus was alive. He called himself the son of the gods. Ooh, so the most famous person in Mark's city was using the term son of the gods to mean he was a divine being. Now we're getting somewhere. I really felt like I caught a lucky break when I found that about Caesar. At this point in the investigation, the evidence was leaning heavily in favor of a divine claim. But immediately after that, I came across something that threw a wrench into everything again. But then I found this. New World Encyclopedia continues. In modern English, the phrase sons of God is almost always used to refer to Jesus. However, a son of God may also be understood in a broader context to be children of God or humans, all Christians. Man, I thought I had this solved. So, this has to be why people feel like maybe Jesus being called the Son of God just means he was a human. This has to be it. Man, I almost had this case solved, but now I have evidence for both definitions.
Tell me where you go. Tell me where you go.
I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know how to solve this. Oh man, we're going to have to trace this children of God idea backwards. I'm pretty sure no one in the Old Testament would have called themselves a son of God, because at that time, to a Jew, if you said that, people would think that you were saying you were God or you were an angel. And that was basically suicide. It would have gotten you stoned to death. So this probably emerged somewhere around Jesus' lifetime. Where did it come from, though? One of the first occurrences of this in the New Testament is in Luke chapter 20, verse 36, and it says, "For they cannot die anymore because they are equal to angels and are sons of God, being sons of the resurrection." Here we have sort of an analogy that the rest of the New Testament writers start using, but they're not really saying that humans are sons of God. It says they've been granted equal status to the angels. According to the Old Testament, after humans were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, basically the spiritual world and the physical world were separated. Angels were off living where God is, and humans were basically off living in exile on earth. According to scholar Michael Heiser, the way you would interpret what Luke says here is that because of Jesus' return from the dead, we become like sons of God. So we are raised to equal status because we're adopted back into God's family after the resurrection. That's what that means. So Luke's not saying humans are sons of God. He's saying that they become raised to equal status. So the definition of son of God as an angel, that could still stand. I think I understand where the confusion's been coming from. For a long time, son of God only meant a divine being. Then all of a sudden Christians come along and they start saying, hey, we're all sons of God because God adopted us back into his family. So now we're equal to the sons of God, equal to the angels. So which definition is Mark using? There is actually a way to solve this conundrum, or at least make a reasonable guess. All you have to do is think about, okay, who is Mark writing to? So the idea of humans being adopted as sons of God, that was a brand new concept. That was insider language in the first Christian church. Luke and Paul were writing to Jews, but not Mark. He was writing to people who had no background in Judaism or Christianity. So it's highly unlikely that Mark's audience would have any idea what he was talking about when he used that term to refer to being adopted into the family of God. They would have probably been thinking about their reference points, Greek mythology, Zeus, other things like that. They would probably be thinking sons of God meant something to do with being the child of a god. If Mark is smart, which he seems to be, he wouldn't use language his audience doesn't understand. And this children of God idea is a new idea strictly for people from a Jewish background. And he's not writing to Jews. He's writing to people who would be thinking of Zeus and Caesar when he says son of God. So I think we can finally put this here, son of God as a divine statement. Logically, that makes the most sense. Mystery solved! All that work and we're only one verse in. Oh, there's a footnote here. Some manuscripts omit Son of God. You gotta be kidding me! All that work and we came up with nothing. We don't even know if Mark actually said this. It was a really horrible feeling. I couldn't verify what Mark thought about Jesus. So I guess I just got to keep going. Well, as it turns out, that footnote in my Bible is a little bit deceptive. It makes it sound like, oh no, a bunch of manuscripts don't have this phrase Son of God. But the Lexham textual notes have a little bit of a general breakdown, and it says that only a few manuscripts don't have Jesus is the Son of God. But the vast majority of early manuscripts do say Jesus was the Son of God. Now I know that some people are going to jump to the conspiracy theory that somebody got a hold of the text and they inserted this idea that Jesus was divine. Yes, it's a possibility, but there are two other possibilities that are more likely and that are less conspiracy-ish that we need to consider. For example, the job of a scribe is actually to make the text more clear, so they clarify things. One option is that maybe a scribe was like, hey Mark, some people aren't going to understand what you're saying here because they don't have a Jewish background. So if they saw that concept of Jesus as the Son of God later in the text, then maybe they inserted it here, and it's not a new idea, it's somewhere else in the book. We haven't read enough to figure that out yet, so we need to keep that in mind. So in that situation, the scribe isn't really adding the idea that Jesus is the Son of God. He sees it somewhere else in Mark's book. He just doesn't think it's clear enough, so he put that right at the beginning of the book so people would know the point of Mark's book. Another possibility is that some of the Jewish scribes were uncomfortable with this claim that Jesus was the Son of God, but they were still studying this text. So it is possible that they took that out of the manuscript. They took out the phrase Son of God. There are known cases where scribes are uncomfortable with an idea and they remove it. That has happened in the Old Testament in places, in a minority of manuscripts. We really need data to indicate which one of those three possibilities actually most likely happened. And we don't have that yet, so we're going to have to keep reading Mark and collect more information to decide. So based on pure mathematics, the odds still favor that Son of God was in the original manuscript. And that's enough for me personally, but I'm trying to be objective and helpful to my viewers because I know how a skeptic is going to feel. They're going to want to know it was in the original and not added later. Although, if it was added later, I can think of some good reasons for why that might be. We're going to have to redact my conclusion for now, but we may revisit this point later. Maybe Mark says this at another point in the manuscript. Maybe he says it another way. We don't know yet. Besides, there's still 677 verses left to go in this book, so we'll see. This situation revealed to me that most people are not going to be able to solve the puzzle of who Jesus is in one night, or maybe even in one reading of the book of Mark. Questions are going to emerge that lead to more questions, and some of those are going to need to be resolved in order to make an informed decision. So I really feel for people who are wrestling with this, but I wasn't going to give up, and I hope you don't either. It's probably just going to take some time. You're going to have to commit to investigating. Next time, I am investigating a very clever strategy Mark used to introduce Jesus in his book. He quoted some specific scriptures from the Old Testament, but why? And some of these quotes people don't even know are there because Mark didn't cite them. No way. You're not going to believe what I just found. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. And if you want to follow Brewery Ministries in the different ways that we're helping people explore faith in breweries, homes, and online, then sign up for our email list at breweryministries.org. We'll see you next time.